So basic APB is, it just runs on a server. That's probably the biggest thing about it. It's a highly dynamic action game, but it runs on a server. Now, the absolute key we have to do for this, it's not about just taking a normal kind of game and making a multiplayer version and sticking it on a server. It has to be something that players perceive they cannot get anywhere else. So we have a lot of challenges to put something in front of people and say, you cannot get this experience anywhere else. And we have to deliver upon that, and that's what we've been working hard to try and do. So I can talk a little bit about how we're doing that. There are what we call the 3 C's of APB. We spend a lot of time, attention to detail, trying out new ideas, and to give to the players. So we want to give the players what we call creativity. That's a big thing now, especially online. We want to give them the power to create. Obviously, we have conflict in the game. It has to be, at the end of the day, a great, great game. It has to have core combat. We use Counter-Strike as the example. What you can achieve with a great, great fun game, as long as it's connected to players, they will play for hours and hours and hours and hours. And this new thing, what we call celebrity, for the first time ever in an online game, we really wanted to be able to be instantly recognisable from the millions of players, and to really have the opportunity to make themselves famous to all the other gamers in the game. So these are the kind of, what we felt that we could really deliver in these 3 areas. We could deliver, an online dedicated base game that players would come to and say, wow, because of all these key features, it really does feel like something very, very, very new. So conflict in APB. These are some of the areas that we're looking at, which are quite new in terms of game design that we're trying to address. I'll just touch upon these individually just quickly. No lobbies. I hate lobbies. I'm sure everybody else does. Trying to find a match, trying to sit in a lobby for 5 minutes for a 3-minute game. Dodgy servers where it's running on somebody's server at home and they go for their tea and switch it off. So there's all these things about, we have to make this a great experience. So we wanted to remove lobbies, and to do that we had to do what's called dynamic matchmaking. So you go into APB, you're straight into the game. And when you start to, engage with the game, it's always looking at you and watching what you're doing. When the time's right, it starts to match you against other players. It's all dynamic, it's all real time. And it's all what we call asymmetrical, because, you can't then say, let's say you're the players in a group of 4 and you're the only single player on there. So we came up with this thing called asymmetrical matchmaking, where, it looks at your skill level, it can bring you together temporarily into another group of players, it can let you go away again. It can roll up big matches, so what might start out as 2 versus 2 could eventually become a 2 versus 4, and then 2 versus 8. And then we start to bring other people in it. So it morphs seamlessly from being a single-player game to 50 on 50, and then kind of dies down again. So it's kind of very, very new in that technique, and that's something we've been trying to push very, very heavily. And everything is what we call players as content. So we removed AI completely, because at the end of the day, it's amazing what real people can do. They're just 1,000 times better than AI. They're unpredictable, they speak, they have emotion. And so we started matching players up and using the term players as content, and really just making them the core part of the game, but in a very intuitive way. I've got some tech videos here just to show you, for example. So typically when you're building these kind of big city, open world city games, they're really a facade. You can't really have a whole living city basically based on a PS3 or an Xbox 360. You start from memory. But on this server that we have, we can actually create the whole city, thousands upon thousands of civilians, hundreds of vehicles, and it's persistent. It's live 24/7. You can drop in at any time. So for the first time ever, when we say a persistent world, we actually mean a persistent world. Crackdowns and GTAs are not. You drive around the corner, drive back in, and those cars up behind you disappeared. There's not enough memory to have that level of persistence and interactivity. But moving onto a server, you truly can create, these living kind of persistent worlds. So when you actually look into the server on APB, no matter what time of day, what time of night, there's just a tremendous amount of life. This is all just, AI. We don't really use these as content for players, so as players versus other players. But it certainly gives you a brilliant backdrop, for creating action. So then what we do is we take players, we drop them into this kind of action. And really it's their actions in the world that basically, dictate, what happens. So here's a couple of players dropped into a server, they're driving around, and this is just a very, very simple example, but, they want to make some money, so they decide to steal a car. And together they're then a group of 2 people. So they'll find a car parked, hopefully somewhere quiet. But it's also very subtle because, this car may have an alarm on it, there are NPCs, AI around there who may radio in that or phone in that they're committing a crime. And these guys are on the criminal side. We also have players who are in this world who are entering on the enforcement side. So as soon as those guys commit an action, we dynamically matchmake them to some enforcers in the world. Now that could be 1 versus 1, it could be 1 versus 2. We look at the skill ratings of the players, etc. So it's quite dynamic. Who, when, and where we match them to. They have no idea where they're going to come from, who they're going to be. Is it going to be 1 guy? Is it going to be 4 kind of low-level players? So that's a very kind of interesting dynamic, and that's one of the core building blocks we have in APB. This idea we always pitching players against players, and we have no idea who that's going to be. And that escalates, like I said, so if a couple of criminals have been, getting away with, murder for half an hour, eventually you may have 10 other sets of enforcers, and we keep directing against them. So you build up these amazing kind of scenes where it's like 10 versus 2, 20 versus 5. So it's very, very dynamic and kind of very unique that way. And also, because there are other players in this world who wanted this world to feel alive, even things like audio became interesting, So we have full voice over IP, but in 3D, built into the servers. So you can't be walking around just And of course that, for a lot of people here, that begs the obvious question, could she have got involved in the fight? So, if you want to grab me afterwards, I can try and explain, but there's lots of mechanics. It was very, very interesting from a design perspective about, you give 100 people a living city and you throw them into it. What are the rules that can be imposed? Because it's just not as much fun as you might think. You just say, 100 players living city, just let them go and have fun. It very, very quickly turns into anarchy. So there's a lot of things in the game that we've done, to get rid of some of those issues. But we'll probably don't have time to go into those just now, but quite happy to do that afterwards if anybody wants to. Creativity was, is a big thing in the game as well, like we said. This idea of players as content, we wanted to also push on to the creativity side. We want every single person in this world to be completely unique to next generation quality, and for people, the first time ever, to be able to recognise just by looking at them, not by having a name above their head. So these are some of the areas that we're really pushing in creativity, and I'll touch upon some of these as we go through. Character customization is one thing, we've talked a lot about APB on. So the creativity, we have to look very, very carefully at that. We wanted to give players tremendous tools so that they really could create their own next generation, game avatars effectively. So we give them amazing kind of, controls, to enhance any kind of parts of the body, etc. they want to. But when I talk about attention to detail, it's things like, moles, freckles, even the veins in the skin can be pumped up and pushed down. When you add fat to the body, actually, anatomically, it adds all the fat in the right place, etc. But all in a very, very, very simple to use interface. It really is just, grabbing a cursor around the screen and saying more like this, less like this, individual parts of the hair can be lengthened, etc. Things like, even when you look at, things like colour of the skin, when typically in these games when you pick a colour, it really just applies a colour change. We actually change the skin pigmentation colour. It affects things like the freckles and the moles and everything, So it really was a method of, we want players every time they enter these online worlds to think, wow, I have no idea what I'm going to see. And we had to push that, to new levels as well in terms of, further making it so that they really can be completely individually unique. So rather than trying to send JPEGs around, the network, because we're an online, kind of game, we have to do this kind of mini Photoshop, so, they could use vector art and create these amazingly detailed designs. Because it's great in a single-player game saying, well, potentially you could do this, you could do something like this in a single-player game, and you don't care if it takes 1 megabyte to save this great, customization. We have to save it all in something like 512 bytes, because we have to send it across the network to hundreds of players in real time. So it was the challenge of, creating all these great, great customization tools, but then also the challenge of, we have to send this. Every time, one player sees another player, it costs us money. It's physical data we have to send. So there was a lot of game challenges, but there was a tremendous amount of technical challenges to overcome as well. But here you can see, that they make their own symbols, their own decals, and they can apply them to clothing. So we only really supply the base clothing, and it's really up to the players, to really customize the color, add logos, add decals, to really create, very, very quickly some very, very cool looking, game characters. And of course share any part of this with their friends. We have like an auction house for players, so they can become fashion designers and sell this in the game, etc. But very, very quickly players can create, tremendous looking characters. Really from the basic building blocks we put into the game. We don't create any characters in PvP, everything is created by the players. But it's the same with vehicles. Unfortunately, there's been a high bar set in single-player games with, with games like Forza and Need for Speed. So, we had to actually better that, and we had to make it network-friendly as well. So we spent a lot of time making sure that every player can completely customize their vehicles, upgrade them, etc. But also had to make it very, very network efficient, to transmit this in real time, to all the players. And we generally kind of showed one at GDC some fun